the project of defining children's equality is a very difficult one, partly because children are not equal in that they are born completely dependent and helpless. We can't say that from day one a child has to be treated equally with an adult in every way, because they simply can't function without the protection and support of caring adults who have to make decisions for them, have to guide them, and be the decision maker for the child. But nevertheless, I think children do have a claim to be treated, if not precisely the same as adults, with the same measure of justice and the same measure of fairness. And that is the difficult project we're now facing in trying to define children's rights. How do we protect children, acknowledging their dependency on adults, and still give them the dignity of being treated as human beings? That's not an easy project, but that's what we have before us, and I think we're now entering a stage in thinking in terms of both the domestic law in the United States, constitutional law in the United States, and also international law on human rights, where a great deal of time, attention, and thought is being put into how to define the rights of children so that children are both protected and also respected. The United States was settled largely by indentured labor, and the indentured labor was largely children, child labor. So I think if we step back from our illusions about the happiness of children's lives and the protections that they're afforded, you realize that children's human rights are a serious, serious concern and have been historically, but they've remained invisible because exploitation or abuse of children has seemed to be something that was simply natural, the way things were done.
Ultimately, I think there's a deeper moral issue that has to be faced. I don't think the whole case depends on it, but I think this is an important part of it. The moral issue is one simply of whether in any sphere of life we should tolerate violence of one human being against another. And my own moral stance on this is I don't think people should be hit. As John Walsh says, people are not for hitting, and that ought to apply to children. I think it ought to be the right of every human being to grow up without fear of being physically attacked by a fellow human being.
It's really very clear that kids should be free of the same behaviors that every other adult is free from. You're not allowed to be spanked at work because you forgot to brush your teeth when you went to work. You're not allowed to be spanked at work because you made the mistake of wearing a checkered tie and a striped shirt. But you can be spanked at home by your parents for that. And that reduces children's rights to a bare minimum. And those rights need to be enforced if we're going to raise a generation. We haven't yet raised a generation that's going to meet its developmental potentials. One very clear example of the difference between the rights of children and the rights of women in the case of family violence is a case I've worked on for 2 years. This is a mother who killed one of her children, a 6-week-old little girl who's lost custody of 2 of her older children and is now battling for the custody of her youngest child. And at each point in the battle, she's won. Every court that she's been before has said this mother should have her child back. Children do best when they're raised by their biological mothers. And the courts have very conveniently overlooked the fact that this is a woman who already killed one child and has never successfully provided care and nurturance to a child for more than 6 months at a time. If this were a case of domestic violence and a judge was ordering a woman to go back with her husband who had previously killed one of his wives, there would be a national riot You couldn't get it off of the television. The judge wouldn't be able to keep his place in office, and the woman would never have to go back with this man. I mean, imagine a judge saying to a woman, well, you know, women really need to give marriages a chance. And I know he strangled his first wife, but give him a chance, and we'll provide you a homemaker a couple days a week to help him out so he won't lose it. Nobody would let that happen. And yet it happens every day with children. The children are returned to biological parents who've done horrific things to kids, but the laws for battered women are much more protective of adults than they are of children. If you go to Washington and you separate out the funding, the Violence Against Women Act is some 10 times greater in terms of funding than all the federal monies that are spent on child maltreatment, and yet the problems have about the same rates nationally and kill about the same number of people. I mean, about 1,500 women to 1,800 women are killed by their domestic partners, and about 1,800 children are killed by their caretakers. But federal policy, federal funds are way disproportionately in favor of battered women. That's not to say that battered women don't deserve the funds. What it does is it's an illustration of our inability to protect children, and that the zone of privacy around a family is wider and greater when the perceived victim or the possible victim is a child than when the possible victim is an adult woman.
I've occasionally gone on radio. Primarily, I think we're talking about radio interviews, kind of call-in shows, to talk about the rights of children. And we're very uncomfortable in the United States talking about the rights of children. We don't use that term in conventional discussion about children, which is why I'm more comfortable myself talking about the protection of children than children's rights. But when I have gone on occasionally to talk in the media about the rights of children, the issue of corporal punishment has come up. And as soon as that issue comes up, the lights go on the telephones, and the call-in shows are flooded with people who say, what do you mean, interfere with my right to discipline my children, okay? Who are outraged that there would be any suggestion that we take a look at that issue as a children's rights issue.